Hello and welcome to Daily Debrief, brought to you by People's Dispatch. I'm Pragya and today we talk about another US official on a visit to Taiwan. Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan is charged with terrorism and a noted activist is killed in South Africa. Lindokuhle Mnguni, a 28-year-old activist who fought for the rights of people who live in shacks in South Africa, was killed on Saturday morning. He was reportedly at home when two men opened fire on him and his partner. Mnguni headed the Ikanana Commune and the Youth League, which struggles for land, housing and services for shanties. He's a third member of the Abahlali baseMjondolo organization killed in the last 6 months and the 24th since it was set up. His death is regarded as a political killing. Prashant from People's Dispatch will tell us more about it. Hi Prashant, can you tell us about this activist and what he represented, why he was attacked so many times?
Right, so Pragya, it's very unfortunate almost on this show. This is the third time in recent months that we have had a segment talking about the assassination of an Abahlali baseMjondolo activist, in this case Lindokuhle Mnguni, a very young activist, a very young militant, a chairperson of their commune, for instance, who was already facing intense persecution from the South African states, all kinds of attacks. He was imprisoned last year, he was imprisoned this year, but his spirit remained unyielding. He kept struggling for a better world, and he's been assassinated. Yet another brutal crime. It's still unclear who the attackers are, but this happens in a context where this occupation by the Abahlali baseMjondolo movement in the city of Durban, the Ikanana Commune, has constantly been under attack by local leaders of the African National Congress, which is the ruling party. Despite all these attacks, these young men and women have sort of fought to keep their project going, have fought to keep their resistance going, but the attacks have continued relentlessly. The state has failed to sort of, do enough to put a stop on this. And if you read Abahlali baseMjondolo's statement, their tribute to their comrade, it's very touching, because it talks about a young man who, even when imprisoned on charges that were clearly false, continued political education activity, that he ran a reading circle inside the prison, for instance, reading, where people inside prison read radical authors such as Marx and Fanon and Steve Biko, for instance. They talk about somebody who, for whom, building the self-reliance of this commune was so paramount that he spent his entire life dedicated to it. Someone who was an internationalist in perspective, who actually went to Swaziland in solidarity with people fighting against the monarchy there when one of the members of the party Pudemo, was killed. So we see a very young man, brutally cut down in the prime of his youth, who was leading a struggle, who was leading a very powerful struggle at this point. And it is really tragic that under the African National Congress, which sort of fought for decades against apartheid, a situation has been created where there is so much, there are so many attacks, so many offensives against members, against people who are trying to sort of, create an alternative to capitalism, people who are trying to create an alternative to the misery, people who are struggling for dignity, for basics of life, and who are saying that, okay, the state is not going to help us, at least let us help ourselves, at least let us show a different way forward. And Mnguni was actually, one of the people in the forefront of those struggles. So if you look at the history, we know that in March, for instance, one of his comrades, Ayanda Angila, who also was imprisoned unjustly, was assassinated. In May, Nokuthula Mabaso, a woman who, when these people were imprisoned, was somebody who stepped up and took over the administration, took over key work of that commune, was also assassinated. And there's really no justice so far for any of these crimes. Just these crimes keep happening again. Even as these assassinations have been taking place, there have been other attacks on this commune as well. So all in all, not just a tragic, it's not just a tragedy, it's of course a tragedy, but it's also, a symbol of the kind of injustice that prevails, the kind of attacks that prevail against the poor who seek to stand up for their rights.
Right, Prashant. Prashant, 24 such killings have taken place since the movement began. What was the work of the movement? What did it represent?
Right, Abahlali baseMjondolo is actually one of the most unique movements, and I'm saying this very consciously. It's one of the most unique movements in the world right now, because it is a movement of homeless people who have said that, we are not satisfied with being treated as the wretched. We are not satisfied with being treated as just people who can receive some handout during an election or for votes or for some kind of patronage. We will take matters into our own hand. So they have staged occupations on lands. They have built without any government assistance. They have built shacks. They have scavenged material. They have built shacks out of it. They have, even somehow managed their own electricity connections. They have run schools. They have run poultry farms. They have focused on sustainable agriculture. They even run what is called the Franz Fanon Political School. And this is very important because it breaks the notion that people generally have of people who are homeless, people who are poor. You see them as people may be deserving sympathy, people may be deserving charity, but you do not see them as political agents. And I think one of the most important things about Abahlali baseMjondolo, if you go to their Facebook page, for instance, if you go to their Twitter page, you see the sheer political will of all these people, of people who say that, who basically say that we are not just to be treated as some kind of people outside society, and this is really core to the movement, and their work has been remarkable, especially, like I said, considering the consistent attacks that have taken place against their occupations everywhere. Because on the one hand, it is the state which often again accuses them of being illegal dwellers or people who do not have permits, but more than the state is also extra state authorities, like people associated with those in power, local political leaders, for instance, their militias and their thugs, for instance, who consistently attack them, try to tear down any creative and sustainable project to do with their livelihoods that they build up, because they see that this kind of assertion by the homeless is a fundamental threat to their political order. And that is really at the heart of the kind of attacks they've been facing. Like you said, 24 activists killed, but also so many imprisoned on charges which are, which time and again keep failing. So in some of the cases that we talked about, there were so-called witnesses against who said, oh, they're involved in murder, oh, they're involved in this, that. But when it actually comes to court, all these witnesses, they are exposed. The witness testimonies that they make do not actually stand in court. And this has happened time and again. Very key leaders of the ABM have been arrested, and then some months later, of course, they're released when the process, and there's no case against them. But what it does is each time and again it blocks many of these alternative projects that are taking place. Say you want to build a poultry farm, you need your leaders, you need your cadre, you need your comrades along with you. And time and again, that is what the attempt is, to sort of crush any attempt at, say, people asserting themselves, people saying that we will not be just treated as passive objects of society, that we are subjects, we are people who will take matters into our own hand, we are people who will we have agency and we will exert it. And that is why Abahlali baseMjondolo is such a unique political movement in the world, because homelessness is a global crisis. And on the one hand, so people talk about all kinds of solutions, but the solution these people have brought, and there's very close connections to the MST movement in Brazil, for instance,
right.
And they are associated and they have close links as well. And the MST also has a very similar agenda, the idea that you take over unoccupied farmland, unoccupied land, and you build agricultural projects around it, and you give people the ability to be producers. And it is a process of also acquiring agency, like I said, and dignity, and not just being recipients of a particular kind of assistance depending on the whims of political leaders. So that is why ABM is a unique movement in this world, and that is why, like I said, they're constantly under attack, constantly under threat. So we'll be covering the story as it progresses as well, but very unfortunate development.
Right, Prashant. Thank you for joining us. In Pakistan, former Prime Minister Imran Khan has been charged with terrorism. It follows a series of confrontations between the government led by the PMLN and Khan's PTI party. Khan lost the no-confidence vote in April, which plunged the country into political turmoil and divided the supporters of both outfits. The PTI demands early elections, which have not been agreed to yet. The Pakistan government is holding intermittent talks with the banned Pakistan Taliban as the threat of armed groups in some regions returned last year, while the country also deals with a massive economic crisis. Abdul from People's Dispatch has more details for us. Hi Abdul, thanks for joining us. Abdul, can you start by trying to tell us why is it that Imran Khan has been charged with terrorism?
In his rallies, which are becoming quite popular, yesterday he was basically talking about suing one of the justices of Pakistan Supreme Court and certain other officials, claiming that they are involved in abuse of one of his colleagues who is arrested, Shahbaz Gill, who was arrested a few days back. and charged with sedition.
Right.
Is basically they are involved in abusing him. Shahbaz Gill was arrested primarily because he claimed on TV that he basically appealed on TV to his colleagues and officials, state officials, Pakistani soldiers, that they should disobey all the orders given by their higher officials, because these officials are, of course, that they are part of what PTI, the Imran Khan and others are saying, imported government.
Right.
So, and they are working against the interest of the Pakistan. This led to sedition charges, and since he was defending Shahbaz Gill, this was an excuse, technical excuse for the state to put him for the similar terrorist charges and all. Of course, this is a political move primarily, if you see, because in last few months, PTI has carried out so much popular mobilization, and it has shown itself to be a viable alternative to the current ruling parties, and even is basically threatening, it seems, the dominance of the military in Pakistan.
Right.
So the military, which is quite in control, does not want Imran Khan to kind of walk freely and do things which he is doing among the people, and therefore this terrorist basically the charges were filed. He has got an interim bail for now, and he himself has not said anything about those charges so far. But it seems that if this continues, this may lead to further escalation of problems in Pakistan.
Abdul, can you also just talk about what is the situation in Pakistan, both economically and politically, a time of great turmoil?
Well, economic situations in Pakistan, I think the condition is well known now. The common people is suffering under the price rises of basic essential goods like fuel and food and other things. Apart from that, there is a deal with IMF,
right,
which is, of course, Pakistan has got some money, but some money is still pending. The deal, of course, comes with certain conditionalities, which will further lead to reduction of whatever state support a large section of Pakistanis were getting, because that is a condition. So that is one part. So larger level of unemployment, price rises, poverty, a kind of lack of basic service delivery is there. That is one part of it. The other part is, as far as the political part is concerned, though it is a democracy, in April, after the replacement of Imran Khan, the new government has come into power. But it seems like this new government is completely under the influence of whatever problems with Imran Khan. But it looks like this new government is completely working under the military's guidance. Even just to give an example, when the IMF loan deal is happening, it is not the Prime Minister or the Finance Minister who is calling the Americans or the IMF to negotiate thing. It is the head of the military establishment in the country, General Bajwa, who is calling his counterparts in US. So that shows that how dominant the military has become in Pakistan, primarily in a government which is supposedly democratic government.
Right.
We know that the military has a dominance in Pakistani politics. It has run Pakistan directly for many years since its independence. But this is supposed to be a democratic government, and even then military is more assertive than in previous establishments. That basically another part of it. So apart from the political and economic concerns, which are of course significant concerns for Pakistan today, there is an issue of you can say the re-emergence of Taliban in Pakistan, and more political unrest and economic issues unaddressed will basically strengthen the cult of violence in Pakistan, and this should also be a concern. This is already a concern, of course. There was an attempt to negotiate a deal between the present government and Taliban few weeks ago. It did not come through, but that need to be addressed, and I think that should be taken into consideration when we are talking about the current political and economic scenario in Pakistan.
Right, Abdul. Thanks a lot for joining us. The third United States official to visit Taiwan in recent times, the governor of Indiana, Eric Holcomb, landed in Taipei on Saturday and will also travel to South Korea. The visit comes as China took up a naval military exercise in the Taiwan Straits after US House of Representatives Nancy Pelosi's visit earlier this month. The United States is aggressively reaching out to Taiwan at the cost of regional peace and stability in a bid to hem China in. We'll talk to Anish from People's Dispatch about the message the United States is trying to send here. Thanks for joining us, Anish. Anish, why this hectic socializing with Taiwan in the middle of economic crisis, in the middle of war in Europe? What's going on here?
I mean, this is pretty much a competition now between the Democrats and the Republicans to see who is more anti-China at this point. Because if you look at it, Indiana's governor, Holcomb, is a Republican. So this is pretty much, and as we have seen, the Democrats have out-hawked the Republicans in their anti-China rhetoric in the past few months. You've seen Pelosi's visit, and despite the kind of tensions that it arose, it went ahead. And not only did the visit go ahead, we also saw another congressional visit by a group of 5 Democratic lawmakers. So this only heightened the possibility of a competition that many people saw coming, and that is happening already. So we can actually expect more and more such visits in the coming few months. And it is not an encouraging situation for East Asia, because this, first of all, we have to talk about the fact that these visits are actually undermining a very crucial, not only US foreign policy dictum, but also an international custom, if not an international law, but an international customary understanding of how to deal with China. And in this case, if you're one of those countries who have taken up the One China policy and have established relations with the government of Beijing, by default accepted sovereignty of the government in Beijing over the whole of China, which includes Taiwan. And when you make these visits, you're undermining that very foundational aspect of any relations with China and Taiwan, for that matter. So this only complicates the matter even more. And this will become a bigger problem, because even though, as they say, the whole point is just to, well, Holcomb's claim is that it is an economic visit sort of thing. He's going to visit the chip manufacturing manufacturing plant next, I think tomorrow. And that will be part of his itinerary to boost ties with the chip manufacturing sector in Taiwan, which is obviously huge. But you didn't need a government's visit to happen in that, for that matter. This was just an unnecessary provocation again, and this will only heighten tensions in the future.
Right. Anish, what are these economic ties that he's speaking of? Holcomb spoke of economic ties between Indiana and Taiwan, for example. Is this something to be taken very seriously or not?
I mean, both these countries, the United States and Taiwan, are the biggest manufacturers of semiconductors in the world right now. And they pretty much take up like 2/3 of the market share between them. In the as manufacturing countries. So obviously, and Indiana is one of those states which houses some of the manufacturing plants for these semiconductors. But those are just an excuse to make this visit happen. This is, if not a federal delegation, considering it is a state governor that is making this visit. A senior member of one of the two biggest political parties in the country is making this visit. So obviously the visit itself is a very political decision. And as I said, the whole point was to one up the other side in the United States domestic politics. So it is pretty much the US domestic partisanship just spilling over into into the US relations with other countries as well. And that has that only complicates the matter even further. Obviously, US and Taiwan has had extensive economic relations. So does China and Taiwan, and none of that was a problem for so many decades. And we have seen cross-strait relationship being peaceful despite the dispute that exists over the sovereignty issue. But these kind of provocations obviously will have its own impact in the coming days, and that is not going to be an easy thing to handle. And I've said this before, like the United States is trying to make a sort of create flashpoints in the East Asian region, which is not known for armed conflicts, but houses some of military and economic powerhouses in the world right now. And these are not this is not a very trivial matter to consider. It is already provoking North Korea right now, a nuclear power. Let's begin with that. A nuclear power, by having one of the largest military drills in the world right now with South Korea. And this is another provocation that is happening. So there is definitely an encirclement policy happening against the so-called enemies of the United States. And also we need to consider what the US people really want. If you look at the manner in which the United States elite is trying to push for a conflict with China and with North Korea, or at least they're trying to create provocations that would make a conflict out of itself. And consider the fact that service after service have shown that a plurality of US people do not really want any kind of conflict with another superpower, shows the major disconnect that is happening, and the clear reason that the US elite is trying to just distract from the real issues that matter to the US people, which is rising cost of living, stagnating wages, not just stagnating wages, but like declining wages if you look at real terms, and how jobs are scarce, food supplies and other sorts of supplies that are essential for one's living are getting scarce or more expensive in the United States. So all of these factors obviously matter more to an average US citizen than whether or not China claims Taiwan. Like obviously we have a large majority of them having very negative views about China, primarily because of, and this is also what, which is the fact that the anti-China rhetoric that has been fed to the US people has obviously affected their mindset, but they still are not in a place where they think that a war or any kind of conflict with this massive economic superpower is going to be of their benefit in any case. So already the conflict with Russia via Ukraine is affecting them in such a horrible way. And a conflict with China is only going to make things worse for them. So these are factors that are not taken into account when such visits are being made. But obviously, these visits are not being made for economic concerns. They're made for political concerns and for political mileage and for a competitive chauvinism being displayed on the part of both the ruling parties in the United States right now.
Thanks very much for joining us. And that is all we have for you today. Thank you for watching Daily Debrief. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Keep watching us and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for updates from around the world. And for more news and analysis, visit our website, peoplesdispatch.org.
For more videos on people's struggles, please subscribe to our YouTube channel.